Racist teens mock a black homeless man, laughing at his misery. But when his shocking secret comes to light, they realize he's wealthier, in every way, than they could ever imagine. A cold wind swept through the park as a man, clad in layers of tattered clothing, sat on a splintered bench. His face, weathered and etched with hardship, bore the silent pain of years spent on the streets. His name was David, a man most people didn't bother to learn. To the world, he was invisible, a black homeless man with no place in society's hustle. A group of teens huddled nearby, shared bursts of laughter. They weren't laughing at a joke or a funny story. Their sneers were directed at David. "Hey, look at this guy," sneered Kyle, the ringleader, as he gestured toward David with a mocking grin. "Think he's saving up for a mansion?" The others erupted in laughter. David sat still, his eyes fixed on the ground. He wasn't surprised by the ridicule. It wasn't the first time someone had pointed and laughed, and he doubted it would be the last. But that didn't make the sting any less painful. "Bet he hasn't bathed in weeks," one of the girls added, holding her nose dramatically. "Maybe we should start a GoFundMe for soap." The group roared with laughter, their taunts echoing through the otherwise quiet park. They didn't notice the tight grip David kept on a small leather-bound journal. He didn't react to their cruelty, not even a flinch. Years of living on the streets had taught him to stay quiet and endure. Yet beneath his calm exterior, David's heart ached. Every word they hurled at him wasn't just an insult. It was a reminder of how far he'd fallen. Once he'd been a man people respected, admired even. But life had a way of knocking people down when they least expected it. The teens weren't done. Kyle strutted up to David, tossing a crumpled dollar bill at his feet. "Here you go, man. Don't spend it all in one place." The others burst into laughter, pulling out their phones to record. David glanced at the dollar bill but didn't reach for it. He met Kyle's gaze for a fleeting moment, his tired eyes reflecting a depth of wisdom and pain that none of them could comprehend. But the moment passed, and the teens didn't see it. All they saw was a man who didn't fight back. "Come on, let's go," Kyle said, rolling his eyes. "This is boring." The group walked away, their laughter fading into the distance. David remained on the bench, gripping his journal tighter. Inside, it held memories of a life long forgotten by most, a life that none of those teens could have imagined. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, David let out a long, shaky breath. For all their mockery, the teens didn't realize one thing. They weren't mocking a nobody. They were mocking a man with a story that would soon shock them to their core. David sat on the park bench long after the teens had left, his thoughts drifting back to a life that now felt like a distant dream. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he opened the leather-bound journal, the pages worn from years of use. Inside were sketches, notes, and photographs, each one a fragment of a story he had carefully hidden from the world. A faded photo slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the ground. David bent down and picked it up with trembling hands. The image showed a younger version of himself, smiling confidently in a tailored suit, standing in front of a glass building with the words, "Harper Financial Group," etched on the facade. David Harper. That name used to mean something. Once he was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar investment firm. People sought his advice, admired his success, and envied his lifestyle. He had it all: wealth, respect, and influence. But life, as David learned the hard way, could strip everything away in an instant. He traced the edges of the photo with his thumb, the memories flooding back. It had been a decade since the market crash, but the pain felt as fresh as yesterday. The firm he built from the ground up crumbled under the weight of a recession, leaving him bankrupt and responsible for debts he could never repay. The stress consumed him, and soon, so did grief. A knock came at his door one evening, and everything changed. His wife, Cassandra, had been in an accident, a hit and run on her way home from work. Losing her broke David in ways he didn't think possible. The love of his life was gone, and he was left to pick up the pieces, only there were no pieces left to pick. The journal's next pages revealed rough sketches of business plans and charity ideas he once dreamed of starting in Cassandra's honor. He had promised himself that her legacy would live on through him. But promises were hard to keep when you had no roof over your head, no one to turn to, and barely enough to survive. David sighed, closing the journal. The memories were too much tonight. He leaned back, his gaze drifting to the stars. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Kyle and his friends were hanging out at a diner, reviewing the video they'd taken of their earlier encounter. "Man, look at his face," Kyle said, laughing as he replayed the clip. He didn't even say anything, just sat there like a statue. "I don't know," one of the girls, Mia, said hesitantly. It felt kinda mean. Like, what if he's not just some lazy guy? What if something bad happened to him? Kyle rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on. Don't get soft on me now. He's homeless. He probably did it to himself." Mia fell silent, but the video stayed on her mind. Unlike the others, she couldn't shake the look in David's eyes. There was something in them, something deeper than she could understand. Back at the park, David's gaze remained fixed on the stars, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He had nothing, but he still held on to hope. He wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. Unknown to him, the teens were about to stumble across something that would flip their perception of him, and themselves, forever. The following day, Mia found herself scrolling through her phone, the video of their encounter with David still on her mind. She couldn't bring herself to laugh like the others. Instead, she stared at his face, replaying the moment when he'd glanced up at Kyle. His eyes weren't full of anger or sadness. They were full of something else. Dignity. Determined to shake her unease, Mia decided to do something none of her friends would dare: find out who David really was. She opened a browser on her phone and typed in "homeless man at City Park." Dozens of unrelated news articles popped up, but none gave her answers. Then, on a whim, she tried searching for "Black Man Homeless City Park Harper." Her thumb hovered over one result. The headline read, "Once a titan of finance, David Harper disappears after market crash." Her heart skipped a beat as she clicked the article. The page loaded slowly, and as Mia scrolled, her breath caught. There he was, David Harper. A younger version of the man they'd mocked, standing confidently in front of a massive building. She skimmed the article, piecing together the story. David had been a brilliant financial investor who built Harper Financial Group from scratch. But when the market crashed, so did his company, leaving him bankrupt. Mia couldn't stop reading. It described how David had fallen off the radar after the tragedy of losing his wife and his business in quick succession. His story was heartbreaking. A man who had everything, only to lose it all. The article ended with an ominous note. David Harper's whereabouts remain unknown, though many suspect he lives on the streets. Her fingers trembled as she turned off her phone. Later that evening, Mia showed the article to Kyle and the others. They sat around a table in Kyle's basement, the room unusually quiet as they read through the story. "No way," Kyle said, shaking his head. "That can't be him. It's just some homeless guy. This has to be a coincidence." "It's him," Mia insisted, her voice firm. "Look at the picture. Look at his eyes." One of the other teens, Ryan, leaned closer to the screen. "She's right. It's the same guy." Kyle scoffed, trying to mask his discomfort. "So what? He used to be rich. Now he's not. That's life. Doesn't mean we did anything wrong." But even Kyle's bravado couldn't shake the growing unease in the room. The realization that the man they mocked was once a respected figure, a man who had built a life far beyond anything they could imagine, hung heavy in the air. Mia spoke up again, her voice trembling. "Do you know what's even worse? He didn't fight back. He just sat there. We humiliated him, and he still didn't say a word. What kind of person does that? A silence fell over the group. For the first time, they weren't laughing. Meanwhile, David sat at the park as he always did, his journal resting on his lap. He noticed a group of people walking by, pointing in his direction. But instead of jeering, one of them hesitated, her eyes wide. "Wait," the woman whispered to her friend. "I think that's David Harper." David overheard her but kept his head down. He wasn't interested in recognition, not anymore. All he wanted was peace. What he didn't know was that Mia and her friends were already planning their next move, a move that would change everything. Mia couldn't get David's story out of her mind. The article had been clear. He was a man who once had everything and lost it all, yet he carried himself with more grace and dignity than anyone she had ever known. She knew they couldn't undo what they had done, but maybe they could at least make amends. She stood in Kyle's driveway, clutching a small bag filled with food and bottled water. The rest of the group had reluctantly agreed to join her, though none seemed thrilled. "I still don't get why we're doing this," Kyle muttered, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "It's not like we can fix his life or whatever." Mia turned to him, her voice sharp. "It's not about fixing anything, Kyle. It's about taking responsibility for what we did. We were awful to him, and he didn't deserve it." Kyle shrugged, but followed as Mia led the group toward the park. The air was crisp, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the ground. David was where he always was, sitting on the same bench, his journal open in his lap. As they approached, Mia's heart pounded in her chest. She had rehearsed what to say, but now that she was here, every word she planned seemed inadequate. The others hung back, uneasy, leaving Mia to take the lead. "Hi," she said softly, stepping closer. David looked up, his eyes scanning her face. He recognized her immediately, along with the group lingering behind her. "Hello," he replied, his voice calm but guarded. Mia hesitated, unsure how to begin. I don't know how to say this, but we're sorry for what we did. It was wrong, and we shouldn't have treated you like that." David's expression didn't change, but he nodded slightly. "I appreciate you saying that." Kyle, who had been standing a few steps back, crossed his arms. "Look, we didn't know who you were, okay? If we had, things would have been different." David's gaze shifted to Kyle, his brow furrowing. "And why should that matter?" Kyle stammered, caught off guard. "I mean, It shouldn't matter who I am or who I was," David said firmly. "What you did wasn't about me. It was about how you see people who have less than you. That's what needs to change." The group fell silent. David's words cut deeper than any rebuke they had expected. Mia stepped forward, holding out the bag. "We brought this for you. It's not much, but—" David glanced at the bag, and then back at Mia. "Thank you," he said, accepting it with a small smile. "I'll take it because I can see that you mean well. But remember, kindness isn't about what you give. It's about how you treat people, every day." Mia nodded, her eyes filling with tears. She wanted to say more, but words felt hollow. As the group walked away, they were quieter than usual. Kyle stuffed his hands in his pockets, his head down. "Man, that guy's intense," he muttered. "Because he's right," Mia said, her voice firm. "We need to be better, not just to him but to everyone." The group fell into a heavy silence, the weight of their actions sinking in. For the first time, Kyle couldn't come up with a snarky reply. Back at the park, David opened the bag and found a sandwich, some fruit, and a bottle of water. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't the food that moved him. It was the courage it took for those teens to come back and face him. He hoped they'd learned something, not just about him, but about themselves. As the sun set, David flipped open his journal and began to write. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, David was sitting on his usual bench, the early rays of sunlight warming his face. He opened his journal, jotting down notes for an idea that had been brewing in his mind for weeks. Yesterday's encounter with the teens had stirred something in him, a reminder that even small moments of connection could lead to something bigger. Across town, Mia couldn't shake the conversation with David. She replayed his words in her mind. It wasn't about me. It was about how you see people. Determined to make a lasting change, she gathered the group again. This can't just be a one-time thing, she said, her voice filled with conviction. If we're really sorry, we need to show it. Ryan frowned. What are you thinking? Mia held up her phone, the article about David still open. We know who he is now. What if we help him rebuild? Kyle scoffed. Rebuild? He's homeless, Mia. You can't just fix that. We don't need to fix him, she shot back. But we can help him get back on his feet. He built an entire company once. Imagine what he could do if someone gave him a chance. Despite their initial skepticism, the group slowly came around. Mia spearheaded a campaign, using social media to share David's story. The post went viral within days. At first, David was reluctant to accept the attention. He had spent so many years trying to blend into the background, hiding from the world that had once revered him. But when Mia showed him the outpouring of support online, comments from strangers offering donations, job opportunities, and encouragement, his perspective began to shift. One afternoon, Mia approached him with a tablet in hand. David, I know this isn't what you're used to, but look at this. She handed him the device and he scrolled through the messages. David, you're an inspiration. Everyone deserves a second chance. Let us help you rebuild. Your story moved me to tears. Stay strong. David's hands trembled as he read the comments. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a homeless man, but as a human being with value and potential. With the funds raised through the campaign, David was able to rent a small apartment and purchase professional clothes. He started attending local networking events, slowly reconnecting with the world he had once been part of. One evening, David stood in front of a crowded community center. Mia and her friends sat in the front row, beaming with pride. David had been invited to speak about his journey, and though he was nervous, he knew this was his moment to inspire others. 10 years ago, I lost everything, he began, his voice steady. My business, my wife, my home. But what I learned in that time is that success isn't about what you own. It's about the impact you leave on others, and sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. The audience erupted in applause, and David's heart swelled with gratitude. He looked at Mia and her friends, nodding in acknowledgement. Months later, David launched a non-profit organization dedicated to helping the homeless rebuild their lives. He named it Cassandra's Haven in honor of his late wife. The teens became his first volunteers, dedicating their weekends to distributing food, organizing job fairs, and raising awareness about homelessness. For Mia, Kyle, and the rest of the group, the experience transformed them. They no longer saw people like David as others. They saw them as people with stories, struggles, and the potential for greatness. One evening, as the group helped David organize donations, Mia approached him with a question. David, do you ever think about going back to the life you had before? David smiled, shaking his head. That life taught me a lot, but this one feels richer. I may not have millions anymore, but I have something better. Purpose. As the sun set on the bustling community center, David looked around at the faces of people he had come to call family. His journey had been long and painful, but it had led him to this moment, a moment where his pain had turned into purpose, and his story had become a beacon of hope. From mocking cruelty to transformative redemption, the teens and David found a connection that changed all their lives forever, proving that everyone deserves a second chance, and that kindness can rebuild even the most shattered lives.